Right, I want to talk about migrants now, because there is a big story around at the moment about channel migrants being given the right to work. The point is surely that they are processed, but these processing delays are taking such a long time. So do they have the right to asylum or do they not? Charles Hymas is the Home Affairs editor of the Telegraph. He is the doyen of these stories and a great man. Charles, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Good morning.
Charles, just talk us through this story for people who might have missed what you were talking about, what you were writing about in the Telegraph.
Okay, so there's a scheme that's been running for some years whereby any migrant who has come here and seeking asylum, who has been here for more than a year, is entitled to apply to work, essentially only within shortage occupations. So this is particularly things like care homes, nursing, NHS, construction, carpentry, trades like that. So what's happened is that there's been an exponential increase in the number of migrants who are waiting more than a year in order to secure asylum or with their application. And so as a result, there's been a dramatic apparent increase in the numbers who have been applying and being granted the right to work. And what we discovered on the Telegraph was that there's a Freedom of Information request which showed that in the year 2022, 16,000 asylum seekers were granted the right to work. We don't know figures for previous or the subsequent year, 2023, but obviously that is a significant number.
So just to be clear, Charles, these are people who haven't been processed yet. We haven't decided whether they are actually worthy of asylum in our country or not yet because of the processing backlogs. Is that correct?
Exactly. So their application is still active and they could actually be rejected.
Sorry, go ahead,
but
Charles.
They're allowed to work. But they're allowed to work.
Okay, so Charles, we've got 16,000 people who we don't know where they're from, who they are. They may not have any documents. They may have got rid of those documents. They may have come across the channel and purposefully got rid of their documents. And they could, presumably, there's an attempt to do background checks, but we don't know what those checks are. They could be working in care homes and in the NHS caring for vulnerable people.
Yes. I mean, they do carry out criminal records checks. And if you have a criminal record or they find evidence of a criminal record, then they will not allow you to work in a shortage occupation. And what we saw is that the figures show that it was about 19,000 applied, but nearly 16,000 were granted. So about 3,000 were sifted out as a result of the checks that were carried out. But the vast majority were granted, yes.
So you've got about an 80% chance, roughly,
yes.
of if you're an asylum seeker, you're waiting more than a year, we don't know whether you're entitled to asylum or not, and you could well be in one of these jobs. It's interesting, Charles, because you're saying obviously there are criminal background checks and so on, but how do we know if those are done correctly? Surely that's a very, very big issue, and there will be real concerns about safety, especially in caring professions, going into people's homes, for example, dealing with people who are elderly and vulnerable.
Yes, I mean, I mean, it's an area that we haven't really looked at. It's very difficult to establish the scale of that particular risk. But I think that what's going to happen now is that I know that a number of Conservative MPs are going to be raising this issue in the coming days. And I'm sure that those concerns will be raised and the government will have to come forward with answers in order to explain why they feel that there is not a risk, if they believe there is not a risk.
These people can also be paid 80% of the going pay rate. So if you are someone who is, well, anybody who has a business head on them, surely you're going to try to employ these would-be asylum seekers, and we don't even know if they're legitimate or not. Surely you're going to try to employ them first if you only have to pay them 80% of the rate that you would have to pay someone who is legitimately in this country.
I mean, the thing about it is that the shortage occupation list is not just covering migrants. It can also cover anybody else in terms of these are jobs where the pay rates are incredibly low to start with, and whatever is the going rate is always a variable thing. So yes, this is why you've seen this explosion in the number of both skilled workers who are coming in from abroad, but also these asylum seekers being drawn into the care sector, because, as you know, they've got something like 100,000 vacancies, and clearly the market is such that they can pay rates which are substantially lower than you would expect, although probably around the living wage.
And some of those vacancies were created because of vaccine mandates and the fact that people were told to get a vaccine, they said no, and then they lost their job. Ian is in Scotland and has been in touch already on this. He says, Peter, how can anyone who has no ID or history be cleared to work in the care profession? Our own people have to be checked, for goodness sake. No history, so obviously there's no criminal record. This is something that's worrying our viewers and listeners, Charles. Tell us, those Conservative MPs who you've been talking to want to bring this up with government, what are their questions? What are their concerns?
I think their questions are particularly, their main one is the issue about how far this may be a pull factor, encouraging more migrants to come. If they know that after a year they will be able to get a job, is that something that is necessarily going to attract more asylum seekers, possibly to take the dangerous journey across the Channel? So notwithstanding whatever happens with Rwanda, I think that is one of their key concerns. So, I mean, the counterbalance to it is the argument, which is an economic one, is that these are people who are potentially could contribute to the country, but aren't able to because of the nature of their status. So there are arguments which are sort of economic, and also, I suppose, the other argument that's put forward is that it allows them to integrate better. But on the other hand, there clearly are the concerns that you've raised.
I'm just thinking about the percentages here. So if you come across the Channel in a boat, there is a strong likelihood that it will take more than a year to process your application. That's correct, isn't it, Charles? Because of the huge backlogs in the system.
Yes, I mean, yeah.
So you get to a stage where there is a roughly 80% chance that you could get a job, even though your asylum claim hasn't been actually processed. But even if Rwanda goes ahead, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, Charles, and tell me if I'm wrong in this, but even if the Rwanda plan goes ahead, there is a vanishingly small, possibly less than 1% chance versus that 80% chance that you'd actually be sent to Rwanda. I mean, I don't want to conflate these, I don't want to make it too simplistic, but you're much more likely, statistically, to not be processed and perhaps get a job than the very, very small chance, even if the Rwanda plan goes ahead, of being sent to Rwanda.
I think you're right insofar as that may be the status quo. However, I think the government is doing two things. One is obviously the Rwanda plan, and the big arguments there about how far sending a small number to Rwanda will necessarily be a deterrent to people, i.e., do I have a chance that I'll be sent to Rwanda? I think the second thing that is not in your equation is the fact that the government is doing a lot to try and reduce the backlog. And clearly, Rishi Sunak made the point, what it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that the what is called the legacy backlog, these are asylum claims which predate June 2022, are virtually now empty, basically been cleared. So therefore, I think there will be a downward trajectory from this point in terms of the numbers who will be eligible for this work scheme.
Should we give the government... Sorry to interrupt you. Should we give the government some credit for the fact that they are clearing the backlog, that there is some progress on this issue? Because the backlog and the processing, to me, seems a much bigger issue. You're the expert, but it seems to me a much bigger issue than sending or indeed not sending people to Rwanda.
I think that's right. I mean, I think that the government took its eye off the ball in terms of backlogs and what was happening with it in the sort of from about 2016, 2017, and what you saw was what was a backlog of 4,000 or 5,000 of those waiting over a year back in 2016 has now mushroomed to about 60,000. So there's clearly been a lack of focus in dealing with that. And it's only in the past 6 months to 9 months that has actually started to come down, and efforts being made to try and reduce it.